Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The rain continued to fall long after the last mourner left the Newman estate. The soaked earth around Cole's memorial site seemed to weep along with the family he'd left behind. Security stood stationed at every gate, and the police cars that had once surrounded the mansion like vultures were gone. Yet the emotional wreckage left behind by Audra Charles's explosive outburst still hung heavily in the air. Inside, the living room had been converted into a quiet reception space, where trays of untouched food sat forgotten on elegant silver platters. No one felt like eating. The fire crackled in the marble hearth, but it couldn't thaw the chill Audra had injected into the room. Victoria stood near the window, still pale and shaken, her arms wrapped tightly around her torso as if holding herself together. She hadn't spoken much since her short but powerful speech. Now, as dusk crept in, she remained frozen in thought, the sting of Audra's slap still lingering not just on her skin but deep in her soul. Claire sat curled up on the couch beside Kyle, her eyes swollen and red. She'd stopped crying, but a blank numbness had taken over. She kept replaying the scene in her head. The moment Audra stepped forward, the accusation, the slap, and the raw, venomous rage in her voice. None of it made sense. It wasn't just inappropriate, it was cruel. Audra had crossed a line so deep it couldn't be walked back. I just don't understand, Claire whispered finally. Why would she say those things about my mom? About Dad? Kyle rubbed her shoulder gently. Because she wanted to be the center of attention. People like her, they feed on drama. On destruction. But she said she loved him, Claire murmured. What if there was some truth in what she said? Victoria turned sharply at that, her voice slicing through the air. There wasn't. Claire flinched. Victoria immediately softened her tone, walking over to sit beside her. She took her daughter's hand and looked into her eyes with a blend of sadness and conviction. Cole made his choices, sweetheart. He wasn't perfect. Neither am I. But whatever happened between him and Audra, it never amounted to anything real. He loved you. He never stopped loving you. That's the only truth that matters. Claire nodded, eyes dropping. The pain of losing her father hadn't even had time to settle before a new trauma took its place: public humiliation, broken trust, and fear that maybe everything she knew about her family was somehow a lie. Kyle remained beside her like an anchor, offering quiet strength. In another room, Nick and Adam spoke in low, urgent voices. We should have thrown her out the moment she walked in, Nick snapped, pacing near the fireplace. And cause a scene before the service even started. Adam shot back. It would have looked just as bad. Well, now we've got media outlets camped outside, 2 reporters trying to buy the surveillance footage, and moms calling in PR teams from every direction. Adam exhaled heavily. Welcome to another Newman scandal. Nick paused, then frowned. Did you hear the stuff Audra said? I mean, that wasn't just rage. She's carrying something heavy. Like a vendetta. You think she's unstable? I think she's dangerous, Nick said darkly. And I think this wasn't just a meltdown. This was calculated. Meanwhile, at the Genoa City Police Department, Audra sat in a cold holding cell, her dress still damp from the rain, mascara streaked across her face. She sat silently, no longer fighting, just staring at the wall as if the events of the day hadn't quite caught up to her yet. Her lawyer hadn't arrived, but a detective was already preparing to question her. The door creaked open, and Chance Chancellor stepped inside. His badge clipped to his belt, his expression unreadable. You know, I've seen a lot of scenes, Audra, he said quietly. But what you did today, that was chaos. Audra didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed ahead. Chance sat across from her. Tell me why you did it. Finally, her lips parted. Because she needed to be exposed. Exposed for what? For being a liar. For always getting to rewrite history. For acting like she's some grieving widow when she was half the reason Cole was depressed in the first place. Chance studied her. So that gives you the right to slap her in front of her daughter and a room full of mourners. She destroyed him, Audra whispered. She treated him like a footnote in her life, and when he died, she wore that grief like a badge of honor. I couldn't stand it. You could have walked away. I couldn't, Audra said, voice cracking. I loved him. Chance shook his head. No. You obsessed over him. That's not the same thing. Back at the Newman estate, Nate Hastings arrived through the side entrance, having just come from the hospital. He approached Victoria, his expression filled with concern. I came as soon as I could. I heard what happened. Victoria forced a faint smile. Thanks, Nate. But I think I've hit my limit for the day. He looked at the faint mark on her cheek, then at Claire on the couch. She okay? She's in shock, mostly. Nate nodded. Audra, she's not stable, Victoria. If she was capable of that kind of public display, imagine what she might do when no one's watching. Victoria sighed. Do you think she'll press charges? Try to spin this as self-defense or grief-induced insanity. Maybe, Nate replied. But what matters now is protecting Claire. That girl's been through enough. Later that night, Victor Newman called a private family meeting. Only immediate members were present, Victoria, Nick, Adam, Nikki, and Claire. The room was heavy with emotion. She's going to exploit this, Victor said coldly. She's already got lawyers. She'll sue for defamation. Assault charges will be twisted into a media circus. I want it shut down. Fast. Victoria spoke up. Let her. Let the world see her for who she really is. I'm not going to hide. You won't have to, Victor replied. I'll make sure of that. Adam leaned forward. We could get ahead of it. Release a statement. Show the footage of her forcing her way to the front. Flip the narrative before she can control it. No, Victoria said, standing. There won't be any narrative. No more manipulation. I'll handle this my way. And how exactly is that? Victor asked. Victoria looked at them all, her voice calm but fierce. I'm going to sue her for emotional distress. And I'm going to make it public. No more shadows. The family exchanged wary glances. This wasn't just about grief anymore. It was war. Meanwhile, Claire sat alone in her father's old study. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the fabric of the chair. She curled up with one of his books, Great Expectations, and let the tears fall again. This time, not from shock, but because she missed him. And because the chaos had stolen something sacred from her, a peaceful goodbye. Kyle knocked on the door. You okay? She nodded, even though she wasn't. I just needed to feel close to him. Kyle came in and sat beside her. Your dad was a good man. Do you think he would have forgiven Audra? Kyle paused. He probably would have tried. But not for her sake. For yours. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I wish he were still here. He'd know what to do. You're stronger than you think, Claire, Kyle said gently. You're your father's daughter. And your mother's too. That's a dangerous combination. She smiled faintly. Dangerous in a good way. The best way. Outside the estate, the rain had finally stopped. But storm clouds still lingered in Genoa City's skyline, much like the emotional hurricane Audra had unleashed. The press vultures camped outside were waiting for a statement, a photo, anything they could twist into clickbait. But inside the Newman house, something stronger was forming than scandal: resilience. Unity. Vengeance. Perhaps. And underneath it all, a promise. Audra Charles had drawn first blood, but the Newmans wouldn't go down without a fight. Especially not Victoria. She stood once more before Cole's portrait in the foyer, her eyes locked on his. Her hand grazed the edge of the frame. Rest now, she whispered. I'll take care of Claire. And I'll make sure your memory is respected. No matter what it costs. And as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Victoria Newman made a vow, one she would not break. The wind blew with a haunting chill as mourners gathered at the Newman estate for Cole Howard's memorial service. A somber grey sky mirrored the emotional storm brewing beneath the surface. Victoria Newman stood by the front row, pale but composed, her face a tight mask of grief and dignity. She clutched a single white rose in her gloved hand, a final tribute to the man who had meant so much to her, first as a lover, then as a co-parent to their daughter, and always as someone who knew the deepest corners of her soul. But even as the soft hum of prayers and distant sobs filled the air, the atmosphere carried a strange undercurrent, a quiet tension that didn't belong. Among the black-clad mourners stood Audra Charles, striking in a silk dress and blood-red lipstick that starkly defied the tone of the event. Her presence had already raised eyebrows. Some guests whispered behind programs, questioning why she was even here. Her history with Cole had always been murky, laced with professional proximity and thinly veiled flirtation, but it wasn't enough to warrant her inclusion at a family-only affair. Still, no one dared to confront her, not yet. She moved with icy grace, each step more deliberate than the last, eyes locked on Victoria like a predator waiting to pounce. Victoria, unaware of the dark storm gathering behind her, kept her composure as the minister spoke kindly about Cole's life, his love for his daughter Claire, and his deep, if sometimes strained, connections with the Newman family. Nikki stood beside Victoria, visibly rattled but determined to be strong for her daughter. Nick and Adam were seated nearby, exchanging wary glances. Even they had felt something was off the moment Audra walked in. Claire, still emotionally raw, clung to Kyle Abbott's hand, tears slipping down her cheeks in silence. The pain of losing her father had already shaken her to the core, but what was coming next would unravel her completely. Suddenly, as the minister invited Victoria to speak a few words, Audra stepped forward. Actually, Audra's voice sliced through the solemnity like a blade. "I have something to say about Cole." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The minister froze mid-step. All eyes turned to her, but Audra didn't flinch. Her red lips curled into a smile that was equal parts grief and malice. Victoria, blinking in confusion, turned toward her, frowning. "This isn't the time," Victoria said through clenched teeth. "You're not welcome to speak here." But Audra took another step forward, ignoring the warnings. "You mean it's not the time for the truth, Victoria? Because that's exactly what I came here to deliver. You've manipulated the narrative long enough." Victoria's voice rose, the carefully constructed dam of grief and self-control beginning to crack. "Don't do this. Not here." But Audra wasn't stopping. "You act like you were the love of Cole's life, but you weren't. You were the burden he carried. The regret. The woman who held him back from happiness." The audience gasped again, and this time, Nikki stepped toward Audra, voice stern. "That's enough, young lady. Show some respect." "Respect?" Audra laughed, her voice sharp and bitter. "Don't talk to me about respect when the woman you're defending stole everything from me, including Cole's legacy. You all pretended I didn't matter, but I did. Cole and I had plans. Real ones. But Victoria couldn't stand the idea that he might move on." "Lies," Victoria hissed, finally stepping away from the pulpit. Her face was flushed now, grief turning into rage. "You were nothing to him. A distraction. He told me himself. He regretted ever letting you into his life. And that was when it happened." In a single motion fueled by rage and humiliation, Audra lashed out. Her open palm struck Victoria across the face with a loud crack, reverberating through the stunned silence. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps turned into screams. Nikki rushed to her daughter, shielding her from a second blow. Nick surged forward, shoving Audra back with a protective growl. "Get the hell out of here." Security, already on edge, charged toward the scene, but it was too late. Audra, wild-eyed and shaking with emotion, had completely lost control. She destroyed him. Audra screamed, voice breaking. She left him when he needed her most, and then she slithered back when he was vulnerable. He died with a broken heart because of her. Claire broke down into hysterical sobs, collapsing into Kyle's arms as Victoria stood frozen, her cheeks stinging and her pride bleeding. The funeral had spiraled into an emotional war zone. Camera phones captured the moment, despite desperate attempts to keep the affair private. The press would have a field day. Audra struggled against security guards, her voice shrill as they dragged her toward the door. She doesn't get to be the victim. She doesn't get to be the grieving widow when she's the reason he's gone. Victoria, trembling, stared after her, lips quivering but saying nothing. Nikki, furious, held her daughter close as Adam and Nick flanked them protectively. Kyle guided Claire away from the chaos, whispering gentle words as she cried, repeating over and over. Why would she do this? Why today? As Audra was shoved outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, as if the sky itself had broken with sorrow and shame. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence. The minister, pale and clearly shaken, tried to regain composure, but the damage had been done. There was no salvaging the moment. Cole's memory had been hijacked by a twisted act of vengeance. Back inside, Victoria pulled away from Nikki and walked slowly toward the pulpit again, wiping a single tear from her cheek. "I'm sorry," she said hoarsely. "I'm sorry that grief can turn some people into monsters. But today isn't about Audra Charles. Today is about Cole. About honoring a man who tried to see the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it." She took a deep breath, her voice stronger now. Cole was complicated. He was passionate and flawed and deeply sensitive. He loved fiercely, especially his daughter. Claire was the light in his life, even when everything else around him was dark. And though we had our ups and downs, he never stopped believing in love even when he didn't believe in himself. Claire sobbed harder, but this time it was different. These were tears of love, of memory, not just pain. Kyle held her tighter. Victoria continued, glancing toward the door where Audra had been dragged out. Sometimes people show up at moments like these not to mourn, but to make it about themselves. Cole would have hated that. But he also would have forgiven her, because that's who he was. "I'm not that generous, not today. But I know who I need to be for Claire for his memory." When Victoria stepped away, the room burst into gentle applause. The tension slowly melted away, replaced by shared respect for her strength. Claire, mustering all her courage, walked to the front with Kyle by her side and placed her hand over the rose on her father's portrait. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "No one can take that from me. Not ever." Outside, Audra was being shoved into a police cruiser, her makeup streaked by the rain and her expression unreadable. She didn't resist anymore. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a haunting hollowness. Maybe she didn't plan to ruin the service, not entirely. But something inside her, jealousy, heartbreak, a thirst for revenge had pushed her over the edge. And now, she had nothing left but a criminal record and shattered dignity. The Newman family stood united once more, scarred but resilient. Cole's memorial would never be remembered for peace, but for the chaos that brought hidden tensions to light. Secrets had been exposed, relationships tested, and reputations torn. But in the wreckage, one truth stood clear. Grief reveals the truest nature of people. Some seek closure, others revenge. And for Audra Charles, chaos was both a weapon and her undoing. Inside Newman Enterprises, Victoria sat in her office, calm on the surface but boiling beneath. She flipped through a thick folder her legal team had put together, documents to initiate a restraining order against Audra, defamation countersuits, and evidence of her public disturbance. The footage from the memorial's interior security system, coupled with dozens of cell phone videos, made it undeniable. Audra had crossed a legal line and Victoria intended to make her pay. Nikki entered, setting down a tray of coffee and a soft croissant. "You haven't eaten." "Again?" "I will," Victoria replied, scanning a paragraph. "After this is filed." Nikki took a seat across from her. "You really want to go through with this?" "She humiliated me in front of my daughter. She traumatized Claire. She turned a sacred moment into a circus. Yes, I'm going through with this." Nikki looked proud, but worried. "Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Not revenge." Victoria met her mother's gaze. "I'm doing it for Claire. So she knows there's justice when someone hurts your family." Meanwhile, Claire had returned to the Abbott estate with Kyle for a few days of rest. Though she was surrounded by support, she still found herself shaken. The image of Audra's rage, her words, her cruelty, it haunted her like a bad dream. "You can stay as long as you want," Kyle said as they sipped coffee together on the patio. Claire nodded, her voice quiet. "Thanks. I feel like I'm walking around in a bubble. Like part of me still expects Dad to text me, to call." Kyle reached over, squeezing her hand. "That feeling never really goes away. But it dulls over time. You'll get there." She looked up, a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. "Do you think I'm like my mom?" Kyle hesitated. "You mean strong, stubborn, brilliant, and scary when she needs to be? Then yes." Claire cracked a faint smile. "I always felt closer to my dad, you know? But now I see my mom differently. After everything with Audra, she didn't just protect me. She stood for Dad, too. And that's what makes you dangerous, Carl said. You've got both their fire. That's rare. At the jailhouse, Audra had finally been released on bail. Victor Newman had made sure the district attorney's office received a strongly worded letter urging full prosecution. Reporters waited outside, flashing bulbs as Audra stepped out with her attorney, looking exhausted but defiant. She gave no comment, simply sliding into a black SUV and disappearing into the morning fog. But her fury hadn't dulled. If anything, it had transformed, now honed like a knife. Back at her penthouse, Audra poured herself a drink and stared at her phone. Her notifications were exploding. Messages from people she once called friends. Some offered support, others mocked her downfall. Her social media accounts were being flooded with insults. She turned on the TV and saw a press conference playing. Victoria, calm and measured, speaking to the public.